You sit down to work, you know it's important, but then for some reason you're watching a video about medieval farm at like 3 a.m. and you might be thinking, why am I not able to pay attention? And when you search online, everyone is basically saying reduce social media, get good sleep, eat healthy. Sure, but if it would be that easy, why would millions of people would still struggle with those issues, right? And it also often dismisses people like me who have ADHD, who already got the basics done, but still struggle. But why is that though? So I did what any reasonable person with ADHD does at 2 a.m. I went down a research rabbit hole and I realized that we've been actually solving the wrong equation. Everyone is basically trying to improve their focus and build their attention. But what if the problem isn't that you don't have attention, but it's that your brain's management system is literally can't direct it? Because like, think about it. If you literally had no attention, how did you just watch 47 TikToks in a row? Or how did you research about that random topic for 3 hours straight when you were supposed to work? It's not that you can't focus, it's that you can't control what you focus on. Before I explain why this happens, I need your help. Just like this video you're watching, these videos take me weeks to research and make, but 60% of you are not subscribed. YouTube barely recommends my videos to non-subscribers anymore, so every subscription literally helps keep this channel going. Please check if you're subscribed, it only takes a second and it's completely free and it helps me continue making content. Thank you for being here. Now let's get back to it. So why does this actually happen? Why do we find ourselves doing something completely irrelevant when we know what we should be doing? It actually comes down to something called executive functions. Basically, your brain's management system. Think of executive functions as your brain's CEO. Basically, like they're supposed to manage where your attention goes, control what impulses you act on, and help you stick to your plans. So what does happen if your executive functions are weak? You basically say yes to everything without even thinking. It's almost like executive function is the thing that helps you filter out things and plan for the future so that you don't act impulsively and do stupid shit, right? So let me give you a very common example, almost like a sign of a weak executive function. Let's say you're working on a project, okay? And then suddenly a notification pops up. So like you check your phone and then instead of telling yourself that like, okay, I'm not going to check this right now because I'm working on this project, you immediately check the notification, look at your phone, and then you suddenly click on YouTube, scroll for hours, and then you're like Instagram, this. And then hours pass and you're like, what was I even doing? So the reason why this happens is because when you have a weak executive function, instead of just like saying no to that notification and not paying attention, your brain is like, check it now, there's a notification, you have to check it now. So almost like you can't control the immediate thought that is coming into your mind. You act on it without even thinking and pausing, which is quite like a common thing, I would say, among you guys and also me, to be honest. Like, who doesn't struggle with it? I thought that was normal, but it is actually not. So why does this happen? Like, what causes weak executive functions and why is it so common these days? There are actually basically two main reasons. One is the environmental/acquired weak executive function, and the second one is developmental, however you pronounce that thing, okay? I'm not a native speaker. So basically, environmental acquired one is due to environmental factors, obviously, which basically causes attention deficit and weak executive function where you act on everything and become impulsive. Common environmental causes are information overload, constant stimulation, doom scrolling, stress, lack of sleep, basically like a modern life, okay? What everything that modern life brings to you as almost like a package. That's why a lot of people have weak executive functions these days. So the second one is developmental, like in ADHD, the one that I have, where the brain's management system develops differently from birth. One of my pet peeves is when people say, everyone's a little bit ADHD nowadays, it's not just you. First of all, that's not correct, but I kind of get why they say that. Because just like I said, environmental factors also affect your working memory, you know, the part that allows you to sustain your focus, inhibit the distractions, and don't act impulsively. So basically, when those environmental factors come in, you start to show the common symptoms of ADHD. But the difference between an acquired attention deficit and actual ADHD is that if you remove those like effectors/starters, the dopamine deficit is still there in people with ADHD because it's by birth. You don't develop it later on. But if your weakened executive function and attention deficit is acquired and environmental, if you would remove those distractions, it actually gets better. So a good example of this would be historical figures who seemed to have ADHD or who show the symptoms of an ADHD because they didn't have access to phones or they didn't have the concerns that we have in modern life, but they still show the symptoms of it. So okay, that's the difference. Good news is that whether it's developmental or acquired, through your environment and habits, we can actually train our executive functions and be more focused and basically control the impulses you have and not respond to distractions, so that even if the notification comes, you look at it and then you don't even respond and you continue working, which sounds like a dream, right? And there are actually 3 specific issues that aren't addressed in other YouTube videos that I watched. And if you address these, I promise your life quality will be like dramatically different, and you come back to this channel and write like, Rudy, I love you, you saved my life, because it literally saved mine. So let's get started. Before I teach you the 3 common issues, I know you're already kind of like getting distracted, and I know you already forgot half of the things that I said, okay? I know you very well. So I created a visual map that summarizes everything that you need to know so that you can basically look at it and remember the parts that you need to do, almost like a cheat map, so that you can actually apply into your life, because just learning has no meaning, okay, if you don't apply it to your life. It's completely free and the link is in the description below, so go and get it before you forget about it, okay? Now let's continue. So let's get started with the first problem out of the 3 that we have. This one is the most important one and the most fundamental one, okay? If you don't get this right, the other 2 also will suffer. So listen to me carefully. I'm almost 100% sure you experienced this before. You sit down and try to work, but then you're like, what about that email? I have to respond that. Oh my god, I had another deadline. Wait, I had another task that was waiting for me. And you start 10 different tasks, but you rarely finish them. It's almost like having 20 tabs open in your browser, and that browser is your brain, and you can't close any of them. And more they pile up, and you're like so overwhelmed, you don't know what to do. There's so much things to do, and you don't know what you were working on, and you're like constantly distracted, and you're like, oh, I want to cry, which is me basically every day. So why does this happen, and what the hell is this? Basically, the reason why it happens is because your brain, particularly a thing called your working memory, has a limited capacity. Okay, we had the executive function, remember, and a part of it is a working memory, and it has a limited capacity, and it gets overwhelmed by something called like cognitive load. It's almost like putting load in your brain, okay? Which makes it hard for you to process information, where you feel like everything feels important and you feel restless. And whenever like a thought pops into your mind or a distraction emerges, whether that's a sound, a noise, or maybe a smell, maybe the light, I don't know, maybe the temperature, whatever that is, you don't get a chance to think but act on it immediately. And you're almost like very impulsive, You remember the email that you were supposed to send, so you open the tab and you started writing that email, and you were like, oh my god, I had that deadline. So you're like very impulsive basically, which makes it hard for you to stay concentrated on a given task because you're so impulsive and jumping back between things. So what causes cognitive overload? So like, what are the things that are tiring up your brain, and how can we overcome them? To be honest, there's so many reasons that can cause cognitive overload, but the most common ones are information overload and constant stimulation. If you're like constantly consuming social media or constantly chatting with ChatGPT and trying to like learn so many things, doing so many things at once, doing doom scrolling, you're loading yourself with a bunch of information that your brain can't handle. And also, if you're stressed or don't get enough sleep or you have ADHD, your capacity for this cognitive load, almost like the coins you get each day, gets smaller. So how do we solve this issue then? I'm not going to give you a very broad advice of like, oh, reduce social media intake. I mean, if that would be easy, we would have already done it. So I'm going to give you an alternative solution for this. It's basically by fighting information overload by externalizing every single piece of information that you come across to, which sounds kind of crazy and extreme, but let me explain myself. It doesn't have to be very complicated, to be honest. For example, one of the daily practices that I do whenever I start my day is I call this like a Kaizen log. So basically every single day before I start my work session or before I even decide to do anything else, I start my day by doing a brain dump. Brain dump is basically you jot down every single thought, every single thing that you're thinking into a piece of paper or a Notion, like I do, and have them visualized in front of you so that your brain is not holding them. So like you're dumping everything that is in your brain. okay? And I write down every single thought, every single task, every single responsibility that I have that is crossing my mind to my brain dump. It could be even like, oh my god, I'm so hungry. You know, whatever that is, I brain dump it there. Once I finish this brain dump, which usually takes about like 5 to 10 minutes to be honest, I categorize them into groups and I look at them and I mark the ones that are important that will require my attention later on. Or if there are any tasks, for example, I take the brain dump and then I put into my task list. And then I look at through the brain dump once I'm finished, and I basically highlight the important ones that requires my attention. And if there are any tasks that I need to tackle during that day or maybe later on, I put them in my task database. By doing this brain dump, I'm allowing my brain to breathe a little bit and have a room to think rather than trying to hold every single bit of information. It's quite easy and you can do it just like with a piece of pen and paper, to be honest. And then when I start working, I do something called impulse log. This is basically for you to not act immediately on distractions and impulses you get when you try to focus, as well as to train your brain to raise awareness towards them and almost like improve your muscle to not respond to those distractions. And I think this is not talked enough. Like, I never seen someone talking about this. It's really simple and it's very cheap. You basically keep a simple notepad or a sticky note, whatever you want. It can be physical, it can be digital, doesn't matter, to be honest. I use this one. And you keep it next to you while you're working. And when an impulse hits, and it could be like any impulse, you write it down in 2 to 5 words. Whatever the thing that crosses your mind that is not related to the work that you're doing, you write down to your impulse log. Once you finish your work session, however long it might be, you come back to your impulse log and look at them once you finish the task, okay? And you'll realize that once you go through this impulse list, 80% of these impulses actually don't matter at all. And maybe like 2-3 of them actually requires your attention. And for the ones that requires your attention, you'll add to your calendar, reminder, and also to your task management system, which I will explain in the later parts of this video. This impulse log, just by logging the impulses that you have and addressing them later, you're actually training your brain to pause between thought and action, which strengthens the executive function we talked about. So almost like you're training your focus muscle and attention muscle. So the 2 methods that I showed you, impulse log and doing a Kaizen log or a brain dump, helps a lot and will be a game changer. But I realized that even with those 2, I still sometimes struggled like with mental overload, and I was like, I would wake up and I would feel overwhelmed. And during the day, I would be like, oh my god, I'm feeling so overwhelmed. I'm like so tired. I don't know why. So I decided to go further than that. Instead of applying externalizing information before my work and during my work sessions, I also started to implement it during my day. So how do I do that? For example, if I'm watching something, or if I'm reading something, or if I'm listening to something, everything goes into my note-taking app. It could be digital, it could be physical, doesn't matter. Let's say I watched a YouTube video, right? Instead of just like passively watching, I basically take notes and I summarize everything that I learned from that video, and I store it and externalize that information so that I'm not holding it. And later down, like maybe a few days later or weeks later, I can find that information. So how do I basically use this note? I create a simple note, I don't even title it, and I write down the things that I learned in bullet points in few words. And whatever that is relevant to, I add a hashtag. I don't even deal with folders and files and organization and stuff like that. I just hashtag it so that whenever, let's say, I want to read things about that I found random times of the day about ADHD, I can just search up hashtag ADHD and I'll be able to find it. And for the meetings, I use a tool called Granola. I don't really know about you, but meetings just like drain me so much. If I have a meeting that day, I will literally do nothing and patiently wait for that meeting to come and let it pass because of like how much mental work it does to me, and it's just like tires me, you know? Before I actually solved the meeting issue, I would be like trying to pay attention, trying to listen to the other person, taking notes, which I will probably never ever look back ever again in my life, and thinking about what I want to say next, rehearsal it in my brain. And then I would realize like I missed last 2 minutes of the meeting and I was like, I wasn't listening to the other person. And then I would be like constantly worried about forgetting the important things. So to solve that issue, I started using Granola, who's kindly sponsoring the portion of this video. Basically, Granola uses AI to transcribe everything in real time. And unlike other transcription tools, it actually understands context. It basically marks tasks when someone mentions deadlines or referencing like previous discussions that you had that you don't remember. And after meetings, you get a highlighted key decisions, extracted action systems, and shareable summaries. It works across like Zoom, Meet, Teams, even in-person meetings. And the good part is that, I don't know if you have like ever seen those, but like there are transcription bots that comes into the meeting and says like, oh, Ruri's bot is recording, blah, blah, blah. Granola doesn't do that. It basically just like quietly transcribes everything as an app in your PC and doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. And like after your meeting, you can chat with Granola to ask about the things that you want to remember. For example, like what did she say about this thing? Give me the tasks and it will give you the list. Honestly, it's like such a cool tool, and I don't want you to think like, oh, she's just saying this because it's sponsored. No, it's really good. And I genuinely want you to try it. You can try it free. I'll put a link in the description below, and thank you Granola for sponsoring the portion of this video. Okay, so now you might be thinking, okay, we captured the thoughts, we captured the meetings, we captured the every single interest, every single thing that is going in our mind. But then what, right? Like what do you do with those notes? Which is a valid question, because like after starting taking notes, I realized that I would never look at them and do nothing about them, and they will just pile up, which is actually reveals our second hidden pattern or problem, which is the lack of clarity and energy management. When we don't know what to do when, how long, and also in which order, we actually jump between like whatever we remember to do, right? Like you remember a thing, you do that thing. You see that thing, you do that thing. Why? Because they don't have a dedicated times and you don't know when to do them, and everything feels cluttered and disorganized. And I'm sure like you had this experience if you have ADHD where you hyper focused on a random thing that wasn't even that urgent and you spend hours on it, and when you come back to the thing that you're supposed to do today, you don't even have enough energy left anymore and you feel like extremely guilty about it. So basically what I did to solve this problem is I looked into my common responsibilities and found that there are certain tasks or categories that I always need to tackle, and this can be different for everyone. But basically all of my tasks fell into 4 categories: urgent, deadline, admin, and creative work. So urgent is basically the task that needs my attention right now. I'm not even talking about deadlines, but it's like so urgent that I have to do it right now. And the second one is the deadline. This is basically the tasks that have a deadline and they're approaching because I've been procrastinating on them. If I procrastinate on the sprint too much, they become an urgent one. Okay. And the third category is basically the admin, which is the boring stuff that I hate, like emails, forms, scheduling, replying to that person, replying to this person. A lot of the chores that I have, and also like other non-related work responsibilities also like fall into my admin category. And the fourth one is the creative work, because I'm a creator. I mean, I'm a YouTuber. It can be different for everyone, so I highly recommend you to go through your task list, to-do list, emails, and try to figure out your categories. And what do I do with those categories? So basically, I decided to create sprints where I tackled each group. So in sprint 1, I tackled urgent. Sprint 2, deadline. Sprint 3, admin. Sprint 4, creative. Usually I get the first 2 in the first half of the morning, so the urgent ones and the deadlines. And then during the day, I'll do the admin work. And at the end of the day, at night, I'll tackle usually the sprint 4 because I'm more creative at night. The key thing about this like sprinting is that there's actually no rigid timing. I'm not saying myself like from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. I'm going to do this or that, because it rarely works. I don't really function with time. You know, I usually go with sprints. I'm like, okay, I just had a breakfast, I did this thing, let's start with the sprint 1, and I look at the task categories that belongs to sprint 1 and I get through them. For example, you know, the notes that we took previously, they might fall into one of those categories. So I handle them whatever group that it falls into. It's almost like themes for the specific parts of the day, and you're supposed to align them with your energy. But to do so, I mean, you need a little bit of practice, and maybe I can do another video about it. The good part about this like sprinting system is it's not really tied to time, right? Like you finish the sprint when you're done, and you can also switch between sprints, but usually it's better to keep one sprint going. And the benefit of this like sprinting system is that when you suddenly remember an email, you add it to your relevant sprint and stay focused on your current work. And you can also review the notes you made during the day, or random thoughts, or the impulses we talked before, and you basically group them in relevant sprints and you handle them when you're supposed to handle them. By basically doing these sprints, you minimize your task switching, and you're not like constantly doing that and this. You're going through the sprint, and most of the time they're quite like relevant to each other or similar tasks, so that you don't use cognitive power to switch between them, which usually causes distraction and poor attention. Now you might be thinking like, okay, they sound nice, kind of seems to be working, but I get bored easily. Like I can't sit more than 15 minutes long, really. How the hell am I supposed to do a sprint, right? I get you. Which is actually reveals our third problem, which is low boredom tolerance. I'm quite sure you heard this before. Dopamine is a reward chemical in your brain. But it's actually not only that, it's actually a pain-pleasure seesaw. When you constantly stimulate yourself with social media and externalize your thinking by asking everything to ChatGPT without even putting an effort to think, or never have a silent moment and constantly stimulate yourself, basically, you're activating this pain or pleasure seesaw. So we have the pain-pleasure seesaw, right? And pain-pleasure seesaw, this balance gets broken with too much stimulation in the long run. So because it's a seesaw, every high creates a corresponding low. So the higher the high, lower the ground is. Think about like the crackheads, right? You need more and more and more stimulation, which is the thing that is also happening with social media and constant information bombarding, as well as short feedback loops, instant gratification, etc., etc. Then you need more and more dopamine over time, which is actually leading to anhedonia, which is basically the feeling of nothing feels fun anymore. The reason why this happens is because your baseline dopamine is high. So hard things feel even harder and almost impossible. And we become more like reactive to distractions and impulses when the task at hand is not rewarding, as like doom scrolling through social media. And our brain starts to look for stimulation. So everything like starts to distract you. There's maybe like a sound, maybe air profile, you immediately notice it. Someone crosses your room, boom, your attention is gone. So you can't even like sit properly for 15 minutes. Because you're always looking for a stimulation. So how do we solve this issue? Again, for this one, I'm not going to say, just quit social media, because it's not that easy. So I'm going to give you an actual solution. So I'm going to show you what I actually do, okay? So I want you to use a visual timer like this. This is actually a fake one of the time timer, which is the original one. I like this because it's louder, because I can't hear the time timer. Anyway, so you basically set a 15 minutes timer, just like this, and you start doing whatever you were supposed to focus on. For example, maybe you're reviewing a document that you were supposed to do and it's so boring that you can't stand for it. You can't stand on it, okay? So you set this visual timer for 15 minutes and you get started. And then you have the document in front of you, okay? There's the 15 minutes, it's in front of you on your desk. You basically remove everything that is other than the task that you're supposed to do. And in this 15 minutes, you're only gonna do that thing. And sometimes you're like, I really don't want to do that thing, which is fine. Okay, so you keep the timer open, you keep the tab open, but you cannot do anything else. You literally just sit down and you just, look at the document or stare at the wall, whatever it can be. But you cannot get up during this 15 minutes. You have the freedom to choose to do the thing or absolutely do nothing. And most of the time, it's like so boring to not do anything that I would tackle the thing. So basically by doing this practice, not only you're lengthening your focus session, but you are training your boredom muscle almost. We're so bombarded with stimulation and we're so overloaded with information that our brain is not used to experience boredom. But we have to make moments for that. And when you sit in silent, like for 15 minutes with the document open in front of you, it gets so boring and your brain cannot tolerate so much that you start doing the thing. And even if you don't tackle the task at hand, it actually allows you to reset the working memory that we talked before, which is the part of executive function that allows you to recharge your brain because you're not inputting anything new. So either way, it's actually a win-win situation. And if you're thinking that I am not disciplined enough to not get up in 15 minutes, which is totally valid, to be honest. The way that I solve this issue is by gamifying the process. So if I, let's say, set up a timer 15 minutes, right? And if I lasted for 15 minutes, I would give myself a plus 10 points. And if I, let's say, couldn't last 15 minutes, and if I got up, then I would give myself minus 10 points. And at the end of each day, you calculate the points and you give yourself a daily score. And what you're trying to do is that increase that daily score by time. And another fun way to do this is by competing with your friends or maybe with your family members. And so trying to sort of win the other person, which is quite fun, to be honest. When you turn it into a game, it becomes more fun and it doesn't feel like a burden anymore. Maybe this is something that we could do in my Discord if I would open one. But this simple trick actually allowed me to normalize boredom, not constantly stimulate myself, and sustain my attention for longer periods of time. It actually allowed me to go from 15 minutes of focus to hours of focus, to be honest. If I really hate that thing, I still can't focus more than 15 minutes, but it's okay. Even if my mind drifts, I don't do anything other than that. I know this was a lot and this is kind of like a difficult video to process in my opinion, and they're probably not the quick fixes that you were looking for, but I don't want you to be panicked and feel like I have to do everything all at once, because I basically, like, it took me years to go through each of these practices and I still practice them when I need them, because it's not that you overcome it and then you never struggle with it again. So I want you to just like start with one technique, just try one, pick one, experiment with it for a few days, and if you get bored, try the other method, etc. And then tell me how it went in the comment section. And if you want me to get deeper on any of this, whether that's like how to figure out whether you have ADHD or not, or more like ADHD tips and details, or maybe a different condition, just let me know in the comments, because I read actually every single of them at 2 a.m. when I'm like supposed to sleep. So comment. And if this helps you even a little bit, please subscribe, because it makes me happy that these videos are actually helping someone else and pushes me to continue when I'm like spending the 100th hour and I'm about to quit and I'm like about to cry, like I don't want to work on this video anymore. So if you would subscribe, it would make me really happy. And if you want to learn more about ADHD and why you always procrastinate, watch this video next. I don't know where I'll put it.